Hello, church family. I hope this finds you doing well. Welcome to Midweek. I am so excited for what Pastor Stephen and Cynthia have planned moving forward throughout the rest of this month. But until all those things start to take place, again, welcome to Midweek. I am glad that you are here. And tonight, I just want to take a little bit of time and camp out in the book of Psalms. And I don't know about you, but I love the book of Psalms. There's just so much in it, so much wisdom that we can apply to our own lives. And my love for the book of Psalms was really reignited this past weekend as one of my old professors in college, he posted a picture on Facebook and it broke down the book of Psalms, all the individual chapters of Psalms. So say you wanted a chapter on joy. You could look at it and it's like, these are the 10 chapters that deal with joy in the book of Psalms. Or here are the 30 that have to do with lamenting. Or here are the 50 that deal with praise and worship and stuff like that. And for me, that's just kind of fun. I don't know about you, but I see stuff like that and it's fun for me to kind of work my way through it and see where everything kind of falls into place and how it all is connected and all of that. But going through this, I found myself reading through Psalms chapter 37. And Psalms chapter 37 is one of my favorite chapters in the entire book of Psalms. And so that's kind of where I want to be at today, is specifically Psalms 37 verse 4. And that says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." And I've actually preached on this before. Actually, when Christian and I first moved back to Colorado, we at the first men's breakfast that there was, I spoke on Psalms chapter 37 verse 4, and really, like, it had been such a big desire of mine personally to be in Colorado Springs again and serving under and with Pastor Stephen and Cynthia and just kind of walking the church at the time, these men, through that entire process and my mindset and everything from there. And so I know for me, I've preached this before. I've heard a lot of pastors speak on this verse specifically, and it's always the second half of that. It seems like that aspect that says, "And he shall give you the desires of your heart," which is just human nature to me. It's like, oh, you mean I'm gonna get something out of this? Like, oh, I receive something. Like, that's appealing, right? That we want something in return. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that desire of wanting to receive the desires of your heart. But I think one has to be very careful on how that is interpreted, because I think it's very easy for us to fall into this mindset of, oh, well, it's my heart's desire to have more money, to have a faster car, to have a bigger house, to have more fame, to have my name known among people. And I don't think that's necessarily what he is speaking about. And I don't necessarily think that's what that verse means, that aspect of it. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But I want to speak on the first half of that verse, because as I was reading this weekend, it was the aspect of delight yourself in the Lord that really jumped out at me. And I really had this, honestly, a very convicting moment for me, because I realized, like, yeah, sure, I read my Bible. Yeah, I pray. I listen to worship music. I worship God and X, Y, and Z, and I do all that stuff. But I just had to ask myself, am I truly and deliberately, I think that's a very important distinction to make, am I deliberately delighting myself in the Lord? And the fact was that, yeah, I delight myself in the Lord sometimes, but not as often and not as much as I should be. And that's kind of where I want to hang out and camp at for the rest of this video, is just what it means to truly and deliberately delight yourself in the Lord. And I think there's two aspects of that I want to look at tonight. There's so many more aspects that we can look at, but these are the two that I really want to take a look at this morning or this evening, this afternoon, whenever you might be watching this, because you're reading this, and I truly believe that David, as he is writing this, is telling us to replace worry and anxiety and fear, whatever it might be in your life, with a constant delighting in the Lord. So the first aspect of that is, I think, when we delight ourselves in the Lord, that we not only expect happiness to come from Him, but to actively seek Him in our happiness. And it's easy when you hear the church lingo, the mountaintops and the valleys. It's easy when you're on that mountaintop, when life is good, to almost set yourself on cruise control and you're just going through it. And I find myself that I have to be deliberate to slow down in those seasons of life that are good, those mountaintop moments, and thank God. To have a heart of gratitude and thankfulness of, Lord, thank you so much for doing this for me, for working and moving in my life and doing this and that. But then as we go down in those valleys, that's when we'd really cry out to Him. But you can actively still delight yourself in the Lord even when life circumstances are kind of crummy, right? And the perfect example of that for me is the account and the story of Paul and Silas as they're thrown in prison. Because I think when you are actively delighting yourself in God and seeking Him in all circumstances, that in order to do that, I think we have to have a deliberate redirection of our emotions. And so for that example of Paul and Silas, as they're in prison and as they are chained, it would have been very easy for their emotions to be negative, right? It would have been very easy for them to have emotions of sadness and doubt and depression and even anger. That's an emotion I would be shocked if they didn't have. Of this anger of, God, we are trying to advance your kingdom. God, we are trying to tell people the truth of the gospel, of how you came down and you died, but you were rose again and all of this stuff, but we are in jail. We might be killed for this. And I can't tell you yes or no if they were truly angry, because the text doesn't specifically say that, but I would be shocked if some of those emotions weren't running through their heads. And so it wouldn't be a surprise if that's what you saw, right? But when we read that account, that's not what we see here at all. Instead, we see them singing and praising and praying to God. And that was their mind. And in order for them to do that, they had to deliberately redirect their emotions to that praise and to that thankfulness and to those moments of prayer. And we know how that story ends. And I think the second aspect of it is that it takes effort. It doesn't just happen overnight. This delighting yourself in the Lord isn't just a one-time pill that you take and you're set for the rest of your life. It doesn't just happen. It's a daily thing that you have to do. I was listening to I believe Pastor Levi Lusko, and he made the comment that if you are a Christian, you are already in Christ, but you daily have to decide to walk with Him. And I just love that, because that's really what it means to delight yourself in the Lord. That is a daily decision that you have to make. And we almost have to take a page out of the wicked's playbook. Like, how you read in Psalms and Proverbs, it's always the wicked do this, and it's always followed by but the righteous do this, and there's always this comparison of the wicked and the righteous. And I feel like the wicked have it kind of right when it comes to this idea of delighting ourselves in what we have, because they do that. You read all over Proverbs and Psalms that the wicked delight in their portion, whatever that might be. They delight in the money, they delight in the fame, they delight in whatever their portion is. And I think we have to have the same mindset and the same attitude as Christians when it comes to our portion. And who is our portion? It's Jesus. And I think we must do well to delight ourselves in our portion, in Jesus. This deliberate of delighting ourselves in Him. And I love what Spurgeon has to say about this. He says, don't think first of the desires of your heart, but think first of delighting yourself in God. If you have accepted him as Lord, he is yours. He is ours just as much as we are his. And he finishes by saying, so delight in him, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And why does he give us our desires? Because he delights in us as well. We read in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 31, it says, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. And delighting in mankind. And I don't know who needs to hear that today as you're watching this, but the Lord delights himself in you. You know, this week I was driving in the truck with Ruthie and Leo, and Ruthie was singing, the country station was on, and she was singing to this song. She was looking out her window singing it. But Ruthie doesn't just sing, like she'll sing the last word of the sentence. So they'll say this whole thing, and whatever that last word is, she'll sing. So that's how she sings. And I almost hate to use this example because only parents can relate to this, I believe. And it's just this, you just have moments as a parent as you're watching your kid, and your kid doesn't know they're watching you, so they're just acting normal. And this was one of those moments for me, is I'm just watching her sing and look out her window and kind of bob her head back and forth and side to side, and just this immense sense of joy and pride fell over me. Like, man, that's my kid. I love that kid. And just as much as I feel that way about my daughter, how much more does God feel that way about you? So I don't know who needs to hear that today, but God delights himself in you. He finds joy in you. He finds pride in you. He loves you more than anything or anyone ever could. He has moments like that where he's just looking at you, and there's just this satisfaction that he sees in you. And it is through this mutual delighting, us delighting ourselves in God, but also him delighting himself in us. It's a two-way street, and it is through this mutual delighting of each other that desires are given. And I spoke earlier about what these desires aren't. You know, I don't believe when we read, he will give you the desires of your heart. I don't think those are necessarily material desires. While yes, God may grant some of that, I don't think that's the motive and the purpose behind those words. You know, I don't think it's he's going to give us these desires of more money, fame, whatever, XYZ, whatever it might be for you. Because I've learned that when it comes to the desires of our hearts, those desires change as we delight ourselves in God. Because if we truly delight ourselves in God, our heart and our desires begin to change, and they begin to align themselves with God's desires for us. And it's almost like our eyes are opened of like, oh man, I had these desires, but those were kind of skewed. Those were fuzzy. These are the real desires. And it's as we align ourselves with God, and we align ourselves with God through delighting ourselves in him, that daily thankfulness and just pursuit of God. And as we do this, as we draw closer, as Mike Larkin used to say, as you push in more and more into God, those desires begin to God begins to reveal those desires in our hearts, and he begins to act on them. And I just want to end today with, if we delight ourselves in the Lord, he gives us our delight. If he is our delight, he gives us more of himself. There's always more that he can give. It never runs out. I follow a young lady on I can't say young, I think she's older than me. Anyways, I follow this lady on social media, on Instagram, and she has made a whole clothing line, a whole clothing brand that's called Always More, and it's based off of God and our relationship with him. because there's always more that God has. We never run out of God. So and that's what I love about this idea of delighting ourselves in him, because as we delight ourselves in him, there's always more and more of him to be found and to delight in. He never runs out. There's always a better future. There's always one more step to go up. So I just want to encourage you guys, longings fixed on him fulfill themselves. Longing fixed on him fulfill themselves. So I just want to encourage you guys again. I just want to end with delight yourselves in him, and your desires and your passions are going to begin to align themselves with God and who he is, and he's going to start giving those things to you. So Lord, I just thank you for who you are, God. Lord, I thank you that you delight yourself in us, God. Lord, that is such a humbling and convicting truth of who you are and your character, is that you find that joy and you find love and you find peace and you find pride in us. There's just a satisfaction that you see when you look at us, God. Lord, I thank you, Lord, that you give us the ability to delight ourselves in you as well, God. So Lord, I just lift everyone up today, God. Lord, I just pray, Lord, that you stir up something in our spirits as a church body and as individuals of this new desire and this new intentionality of pursuing you, God. Lord, I just pray, Lord, that we deliberately pursue you, God. Lord, that we deliberately delight ourselves in you, God. So Lord, I just thank you and I praise you in your name. Amen.
Yeah.